How do you... Christ, I mean, why can't anything be ruddy simple anymore? Noonan! Val! Can you come and look at this bloody thing for me? Is it even working? I can't see anything moving on it. Right, so it's recording then. Are you sure? No thanks, love. Don't really know why Shepard insists on these reports being audio recorded anyway. Don't know who's going to play them to either. No, it's fine, love. You carry on. I think I've got the hang of it now. I've been asked. Well, no, that's not quite right. I've been ordered to record my findings in relation to our mysterious visitor from who knows where. You know, I'd never believed there'd be anywhere out there that's more pedantic than working for the police. But the more I work for the army, the more they seem to be. Not that it's just the army. I'm sat here on an RAF base, working next to a Navy commander, reporting back to the army. If I'm honest, none of it makes any sense. But then there's a lot of that going round at the moment, the most obvious being our new arrival. This fella that suddenly appeared out of thin air, nearly breaking his neck in the process. Fourth such chap to do so in a row. First one to be found alive. He hasn't told us much so far, other than his name, Wennon. I can't figure out if that's his first name or his last name, and he's not saying. And this story of his, being from the future, needing our help to stop the Jerrys from assassinating Hitler. That's still a bit too much for me to swallow at the moment. Me and the army. But there is something about him. The way he talks, the way he carries himself. He's persuasive. I am starting to think there might just be something, just a little bit of something to what he's saying. But how he's going to convince me, or anybody, well, that still remains to be seen. Christ, what a morning. I don't really know where to start. Wennon has gone on to give up a little bit more after we sat down for breakfast. He's military, British Army, from roughly 100 years in the future, if he's to be believed. He says he can't tell me much more than that. It's too much of a risk. If he did, there's a chance it might make me or someone else do something that could change the past, which could then change the future, and maybe even prevent him from being born. There's a word he used for it. Paradox. Something like that. DC Noonan. She seems to understand it a little bit better than I do. Benefit of youth, I guess. If he is telling the truth, it's nice to infer from that the Germans aren't going to win the war, and there'll still be a British army in the future. I mean, that's something. But after that, things just got a bit strange. He explained how he'd been briefed to use me as a point of contact in the past. Only me. Nobody in the army. And then he started to tell me some of the stuff from my past. My upbringing, how my father disappeared when I was young, my army service, the injuries I received during the war, the last war, I mean. The case I dealt with when I got back from France, the one that cost me my post on the CID at Dudley, with the Nolan boy, the monster that he killed. There's no way anybody could have seen that report, the one I wrote about it. Not under normal circumstances. If it wasn't destroyed by Wilbur Steer, it's still locked up tight somewhere in the basement, underneath Dudley Nick. The fact that Wennon knows about it, and the other parts of my past, other cases I've dealt with, that's not normal. It's not right. But he tells me in the future, he's got all that detail and more. And that's how he was going to convince me of who he is. I won't persuade Shepard, though, or any of the other military folks here. And I've told Wennon that. He's still got his work cut out for that. The more I talk to him, the more I believe deep down there's some truth in what Wenham says, even though it does sound like utter madness. He has given up a little bit more detail. Not sure if that's a result of me questioning him or his own design. Time travel, so he says, is experimental. It's tightly regulated. The government of the future doesn't want people going back to win wars or kill politicians. But he says something went wrong. Some scientists working on a project at some heavily guarded institute near Osnabrück went rogue. Sends himself back in time, leaving a note saying he was going to save the German people by killing Hitler and ensuring the war ends up on favourable terms for them. Wenham hinted that Hitler might be one of the key factors that helps us defeat Germany, which is a sentiment some of the officers here seem to concur with. Realising they get no help from anyone in their own country in the past, the Germans in the future made a beeline for us, and we evolved a plan to try and stop this scientist. And that's why Wenham finds himself here, still trying to convince us to assist him. Though he has told me he thinks he's figured out a way to change that now. He's asked me to get some writing materials and take them back down to him. Where to begin? This afternoon, Dr. Owens and myself were summoned to a meeting with Commander Shepherd in private. Shepherd informed me that a couple of weeks back, Wenham passed him a number of sealed envelopes, all of which had a date on that he was supposed to open them. The first one he'd opened was on 31st of October, and in it there was a note saying how that day a German U-boat was going to sink an American ship called the Reuben James. Shepherd made some inquiries later that day with the Admiralty, and he found out that that ship it had been sunk off the coast of Iceland. That alone hadn't been sufficient to change Shepherd's feelings towards Wenham, not to any great extent. But then he's opened another envelope this morning. Again, it's detailing the sinking of a naval vessel by a German submarine. This time it's one of our own, the Ark Royal. And that's happened. This afternoon, the Ark Royal, the aircraft carrier, it's been sunk off Gibraltar. It's not general knowledge, not many people know it yet. And yet this man sat down in our guard room, where he's been for the last couple of weeks, wrote down the rough time and the rough coordinates where it was going to happen, weeks ago. There's a number of envelopes left, and the dates on them span a couple of months. So now we're faced with a dilemma. Do we keep using them to gauge the truthfulness of the prisoner? Or do we open them and try and get some intelligence in the future, try and save lives? Both myself and the doctor think that if Wenham's mission is as vital as he says, then the envelopes stay sealed. I can only hope we can convince the commander of that argument, because I don't think he believes us. The moment Shepherd called a meeting this morning, we already knew what he was going to show us. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. It's all anybody's been talking about today. As soon as we stepped into his office, the commander showed us an envelope with today's date written on it. He hadn't opened it yet, and when he did, there it was. Detail of the Japanese attack, scrawled in Brennan's handwriting. The time it took place, disposition of the Japanese fleet, American casualties, was all there. There can't be any uncertainty now for any of us. He clearly knows more about the future than it'd be possible for anybody to guess. Add that to his knowledge of my past, there's no doubt. Everything he's told us so far has to be the truth. After the meeting, with Shepherd's blessing, I went to his cell to tell Wenham he'd succeeded in convincing us of his cause, and I asked him to provide the detail of what he needed to complete his mission. He's told me he needs access to a number of items of equipment and some weapons, which he'll then modify. And then in March next year, we need to insert him into the German Reich, near to a place called Rastenburg, where he's going to try and do something that everybody else in this country thinks would be the easiest way of solving this war. He's going to try and stop somebody else from the future killing the Führer, Because if they succeed in doing that, this war could go on for God knows how long. This is madness. Utter madness. Unfortunately for me, and everybody else on this base, it also seems to be the truth.